And welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Still Curtain podcast. I'm your host, Tommy Jaggi, editor of StillCurtain.com. Joining me, as always, is contributor Shayne Kubas. We're coming off a Steelers win here, but one that we don't feel particularly good about, Shayne. It was kind of a close back and forth slot fest, if you will, and it required 2 defensive touchdowns to get the job done. We're going to talk about the Steelers versus Raiders. We're going to preview that game, talk about the odds. Shayne and I will give our predictions later in the pod. We're also going to talk about the Steelers' offense, or lack thereof, rather, and what Kenny Pickett and the offensive line can do to improve things moving forward. But first, before we do that, let's talk about the news this week, and let's rehash the Steelers versus Browns game, Shayne, in week 2. Obviously, Steelers came away with a narrow victory here, 26-22 score. But like we said, 14 of those points were scored on the defensive side of the football. So you have 12 points, Shayne. We are now 2 weeks into the season, 9.5 points per game from the Pittsburgh Steelers offense. What do you make of this? Let's start about with your biggest takeaways from the Steelers versus Browns game in week 2.
I mean, well, the biggest takeaway is that the defense is the better offense for this team, right? Like, clearly, we just need to let them be on the field all the time. Just punt the ball away on first down. Just let the defense go out there and see if they can score twice, right? Like, no, I'm just, but again, it's just ridiculous, right? I mean, we scored 19 offensive points and the defense has scored 14. Like, at some point, that gap's got to widen a little bit, right? Like, we can't allow the defense to keep pace with the offense. I mean, I guess if they can keep doing it every week, then great. But that's not going to happen in the NFL, right? Like, that's just not going to happen. So, we won this game because the Browns' offense was pretty much just as bad. They just had a run game that they were able to lean on early, and then had a couple big plays late that kept them in the game and got them a couple scores. Outside of that, they were just as bad, right? Like, Deshaun Watson looked awful. He continues to look awful, and we quite honestly got bailed out by our defense. Like, Highsmith with the sack, fumble with 5 minutes left, giving us a lead and making the Browns have to go score, and they just couldn't do it. Like, obviously the initial pick 6 on the first play of the game, like, that is what carried us to victory. And the offense did a couple things that were better than week 1, but again, 5-point difference in scoring does not equal a good offensive performance. And we'll talk more about it, but just again, like, the defense carries us once again.
Yeah, it was just a train wreck. It was an absolute train wreck. I'm going to pull out some stats here in a little bit when we talk about what the offense can do to improve. But it was not good, Shayne. Let's move on from this for now. We'll get back to this Browns game here in just a minute. And if you guys are joining us here in the live chat, please drop any comments or questions you might have for us. And Shayne and I would love to get your questions. Let's talk about the Nick Chubb injury for a second here. I know not a Steelers player, but very much impacts the Steelers, the AFC North. I mean, Nick Chubb, for my money, is maybe the second best running back in the league. I think you got McCaffrey and you got Chubb. And like, I feel like those two guys are kind of on their own a little bit for what they offer their respective teams. And so, and if you didn't see the injury, I mean, if you're watching the game, you probably did, obviously, but devastating knee injury. I mean, the knee just buckled inside out. It's kind of like going way back to, I think it was 2015 when Chubb did that at Georgia. And so not an injury you want to see at all for his career. He's going to be 29 years old next year. You wonder if this is maybe the end of Nick Chubb. And if he does come back for a couple more years at that running back position, we know how that shelf life is anyway. Is he going to be the same player at all after such a major knee injury? So we don't have a timetable of his return. But it does affect the Browns' game plan moving forward. I mean, this could potentially, I don't think, Shayne, and everybody, if you know me and how I rant on Twitter sometimes, I don't think that most running backs move the needle very much at all, if any. I think that Chubb is one of those guys who potentially do, because the Browns' offense and their game plan has to run through Nick Chubb. And so there's going to be a drop from Nick Chubb to Jerome Ford. There just is. And whoever else the Browns go out and decide that they want to get. So that's going to impact them moving forward. And then even in this next matchup, when they play the Steelers again this year, you don't have to game plan for Nick Chubb being there.
Yeah, and I think the first thing I want to mention with his injury is obviously we're fans of the Steelers, not the Browns, but no one wants to see Nick Chubb go out. Like,
for sure.
One of the most fun players to watch carry the football, maybe at least in my lifetime, honestly. Like, I think people don't understand, like, even going back to college, like before he tore his knee up and even after, like he eventually got back to the player that he looked like prior to that injury. But I was watching Chubb a lot in Georgia at that time. And before his knee blew up, I was already thinking, like, this guy might be the best running back I've ever seen. Like he was that unbelievable in college, and it did eventually translate to the NFL once he got back healthy. But if he can't come back fully healthy from this, if he can't do it again, because again, this is basically the same injury from what I've seen to what he had at Georgia. He's already done it once, but he did it as like a 19, 20-year-old, not a guy that's getting into his not late 20s, but getting closer to there. And you hope he can come back because, again, I want to play the best, and also I want to see a guy like that continue to play. He's the best pure runner in the sport. Like, you can talk about Christian McCaffrey because of his receiving ability and the offense he plays in, like who's better. But if we're just talking about who do I want to tote the rock in the situation where I need 6 yards on second down or whatever, it's going to be Nick Chubb. Like, Derrick Henry was that guy for a while, and like he still can do that, but he's always been much of a guy that needs that open lane to really get up and going because of his size, right? Like, once he's in the open field, forget about it. Chubb breaks tackles from the second he has the ball to whenever the play is over. Like, he can make moves in the backfield, all of that. So you hope that he can come back at some point, but it's certainly, like you said, it is going to affect the Browns because they had a trump card basically on third downs and short yard situations and trying to stay ahead of the chains. That was basically they're like, yeah, we're going to get 5 yards every time this guy touches the ball. He averaged 5.3 yards per carry for his career. That's gone now. Jerome Ford played well in this game. He had the long run thanks to Levi Wallace. I'm sure we'll talk about that a little bit later. But outside of that, he didn't do the stuff, and he's not going to do the stuff that Nick Chubb does, right? So you wonder if this is going to really impact their season because of the fact that Watson has not come back to the level that they wanted him to play at.
Yeah, and for my money, Shayne, the most consistent runner in the league over the last 4 or 5 years.
Yes,
and just a staple to that offense. And so devastating blow for them. I do feel for them. We don't want to see injuries to anybody. It doesn't matter if it's a rival that we hate or not. No. We do have a question popping in here. Let's see. All right. Do the Steelers need to manufacture more touches of Calvin Austin? The lack of team speed is concerning. It's absolutely concerning, Dustin. And I think that the answer is probably yes. I mean, I think that he needed to be more involved than what he was. The Steelers obviously were the worst team in the league in yards after the catch last year. I think Austin can very much help in that regard. And so we said this on the curtain call yesterday, Shayne. Give me a drag route. Like, give me Calvin Austin in a drag, something we have not seen this year yet for the Steelers. And let's see what he does with it. The guy runs 4.3. He has 11'3" broad jump, and it's so explosive coming out of Memphis, so productive. I'd like to see him bridge that gap. Obviously losing a Deontay Johnson, who we're going to talk about here in a second too, is huge. But if you don't have anything to make up for that, then your offense is just going to be so stale. So yes, I do think that Austin needs to get more involved. And I don't know if the answer is engineering touches for him. I think that he's a guy that can get open on his own. We'll see what happens. And Steelers got a tough test. I mean, these first 2 weeks were against some really good defenses. And so I can't put it all on one person or the next, but there's a combination of factors going on here. But yeah, it's a good question there. Let's talk about Mike Tomlin's comments for a second here, Shayne. It's much of the same with Coach T. I mean, a lot of the old cliches that we get pretty much every time. He did say that he's not going to make any knee-jerk reactions to what we saw this past week in terms of players that were performing badly. Obviously, everybody at Acrisure Stadium chanting "Fire Canada," and for obvious reasons there. But there was a lot of bad. There was a lot of bad in this game. And I said on the curtain call yesterday, it's one of those games where you don't come out of this feeling super optimistic about your team in the slightest, because it quite literally required a pair of defensive touchdowns for you to win this game. And so when he says no knee-jerk reactions, that to me sounds like, all right, we're not making corresponding moves to say, yeah, we are moving forward in a different direction at one position or another. And there were a couple guys that I thought just played horrible in this game. Shayne, we were harping on Levi Wallace a little bit there. I thought this two game stretch from Wallace to begin the season is as bad as I've seen from a starting cornerback in the NFL in quite some time. And you do see plays when Joey Porter comes on the field for as limited as what it is. He had a pass deflection early in the game, and then he came back in final play of the game to get the Browns off the field. He drove the receiver to the sideline and call it defensive holding, whatever. He had a great play, and nothing was called there, obviously. So I do think that changes need to be made. Do you get the impression that Tomlin is leaning that way or no?
So in most cases, the whole knee-jerk reaction thing in the NFL is very much a smart idea. You do not want to make sweeping
Yeah.
changes based off of a small sample size. However, there's certain changes that are just so apparently needed that it does not matter that it's 2 weeks into the season. And a lot of those are offensive, but when you talked about Levi, my studs and duds haven't come out yet. I did finish that up. We'll have that up on Still Curtain later today, probably. But Levi, I had a whole section just for him because he's a guy that his story is really cool. He was a walk on at Alabama, got a scholarship junior, senior year, worked himself into an NFL Combine invite, went undrafted, all that stuff, won a starting job with the Bills. He's done a great job for himself in his career, but he is cooked. There is nothing left for
Mhm.
him as a starting corner in the NFL. He was already behind the 8 ball athletically from the get-go. He's a 4.63 guy. We've talked about that. Steelers love their 4.6 corners lately for whatever reason. But ultimately with him is once you reach a point where you lose any sort of steps, and I think he has lost about a step at this point. He was already
Yeah.
about 2 steps behind most of the top guys athletically. He straight up can't cover anybody anymore. I mean, Amari Cooper was just
Mhm.
working him out there. It was no contest. And again, Amari Cooper's a great receiver, so I'm not going to sit here and say like,
Mhm.
oh, Joey Porter Jr. would have locked him up or anything like that. But he can hang with him physically. Like he can at least affect him in his routes and stay with him and stay in sticky coverage where Levi just can't do it. And it's not his fault necessarily, it is what it is. Like he just can't do it anymore. But my biggest problem is if you're not going to be able to cover people, at least do your job in other facets of the game. He let that 69-yard run by Jerome Ford up because he did not maintain his contain. And once he got
Mhm.
around him, guess what? You saw the lack of speed. He couldn't catch up with them and he gave up on the play. And at that point, I'm sorry, he's got to be off the field. Like that's just what it comes down to.
Yep. And that play, Shayne, that was really the icing on the cake for
Yes,
me.
it
That
was.
that did it for me. I'm like, okay, this was such a bad angle that you took. You were not. I mean, if you can do one of two things. You can either contain, or you can be aggressive. He did
Yes.
neither. He
No, he
stood
just stood in
behind.
place for too long.
Yes, he stood in place, waited for Jerome to get outside of him. And then at that point, that's all she wrote
Yeah, it was
because Wallace
over.
doesn't have the makeup speed. And so I'm done. I'm ready to move on. I mean, that's my opinion. That's how I would view this.
Yeah.
I mean, Porter has looked solid when he's come in, albeit limited snaps. This is the guy you drafted. We know that from the beginning that Wallace was just a stopgap guy. And so I'd like to see them move on there. All right. Enough about Levi. Let's continue on here with some of the other news this past week. Deontay Johnson and Anthony McFarland both land on IR. We knew that Cam Hayward was going there. I mean, the guy's going to be out half the season. Unfortunately, it's one of Steelers' best players. I was optimistic that Johnson wouldn't miss that long, but it's not surprising at the same time. I guess what it does give the Steelers, Shayne, is it kind of lines up with that early week 6 bye. And
Yeah.
so he can take the 4 weeks off, get that extra 6th week, and then hopefully be ready and back to full speed after that with no setbacks. And what I didn't want them to do was rush Johnson back to the field, have him suffer a setback, and then land on IR eligible to return, miss another 4 weeks, middle of the season. So he's going to get it done and over with right away. Anthony McFarland, though, this one came as a bit of a surprise to us because he played early on, and we didn't really foresee the knee injury being an issue. And so now all of a sudden, Anthony McFarland's on IR. Steelers promote Godwin Igwebuike, grab him from the Falcons practice squad.
Mm-hmm.
And so this one is, I was hoping that McFarland would be a guy that can kind of step in and give him a few touches here and there. I mean, he's very splashy during the preseason. He has that explosive play ability. We know the Steelers could use some of that as well. But he is also gone on IR as well. And so these guys are missing at least 4 games.
Yeah, and like Deontay, I'm okay with it. Like you said, I think that was the best move because if you try to
Mm-hmm.
bring him back too early, when really the next 3 games, the Ravens game is the one that's toughest. And honestly, at this point, the way they're playing, I don't know if he would have made that much of a difference, whether he
Yeah.
played or not. Like if we win that game, it's going to probably be because of our defense anyway. So realistically, getting him back after the bye week should allow him to finish the season healthy. And at least not because of the hamstring, right? If it's something else, then whatever. But his hamstring should be fully recovered by that point. And then McFarland's unfortunate because the guy finally makes the roster. He has a couple nice plays and goes down. You just hope that when he gets back, that he's reinserted as the third back and the kick returner. So,
Mm-hmm. And so in corresponding moves, Shayne, the Steelers signed defense tackle Braden Fehoko to their active roster up from the practice squad. So we can probably assume that he's going to be a little bit involved here. I know the Steelers run defense obviously has not been great.
No.
And then again, the context matters though too. You played perhaps the two best rushing teams in the NFL in back-to-back weeks. Now the Browns won't be this year without Nick Chubb, I'm sure.
Right.
But they've been that way for the past couple of years. And then to replace Anthony McFarland, Godwin Igwebuike was signed off of the off of the Falcons practice squad, meaning that he'll have to be on the active roster for the Steelers. I can't imagine him doing much though, kind of just in that reserve role there for them. Anything you want to add there?
No, I mean, Igwebuike he's made a couple plays in the preseason in the past, and I think he played for the Lions a little bit as well, where he got some snaps, but he's probably just depth to have in case, one of the top two guys goes down. So he at least has played before. So.
All right, Shayne, let's move on to our first big discussion topic of our show here today. And if you guys are just joining us now, please drop a message in the chat if you guys have a question that you'd like us to answer or something we want to go over. We'd love to be able to get to those as well today. All right, Shayne, how can the Steelers improve this dismal offense? Whatever adjective you want to use, insert here.
There's a lot.
It's been that bad. And doing simple math, Shayne, I'm not a math guy, but 9.5 points from the offense in scoring per game, 7 points per game for the defense in scoring. I mean, it shouldn't be this close, really. And not to fault the defense. We won this game because of the defense. The offense has to get better. It has to get better. I'm going to fire off some stats for you here. I've got pulled up.
I'm sure.
All right, Steelers right now through 2 games. Get ready. Cover your ears for the squeamish here. 32nd in the league in offensive points per game, 31st in total yards, 31st in rushing yards, 18th in passing yards, 30th in yards per play, 29th in third down conversion percentage, 32nd in first downs, 31st in time of possession. All of that, Shayne, collectively equates to a garbage offense that is the worst in the league right now. So how can we get better from here? Where do we go from here? I know that we had 2 tall tasks against very stout front sevens these past 2 weeks. That matters. But the offensive line play is bad. The play calling's bad. Kenny Pickett has been atrocious. Let's start with Pickett here, Shayne. How can Kenny Pickett improve in week 3 and beyond compared to what we saw these first 2 weeks?
So really the top thing he can do individually is hit his throws that have been there, because so far there's been a lot of moments where he had throws to make and they were open and he hasn't made them. Now, I will get more into this as we talk about the next part of the offense that we have to improve and just the overall offense. But I think the biggest issue here is we're having a compounding problem take place where it starts with the play calling. The play calling is not good, right? So you start off on a bad foot. It's just gonna be how it is. Like, he's not going to call good plays. We know this. Canada isn't going to do it. Then you have to take that bad play and you have to try to execute it properly. Well, the offensive line has not held up at all, again, against a tough front both times. And it's been rough for them to play these guys. But they have shown no improvement from last year, really the last couple of years. Then, because of that, you're now behind the chains most of the time because you can't run the football. You're pressured most of the time on third down because they know you're passing because it's 3rd and 10. And then you have a young quarterback who is clearly rattled from his week 1 that did not go so well and has still not been able to rebound from that. So it's all just this compounding issues that just keep happening. And until one of those chains breaks, right, whether the play calling improves, which we don't expect, the offensive line play improves, or Kenny just says, well, screw it, I'm going to have to figure it out and just start hitting more of these throws that have been open, one of these things has to happen. I think the most likely thing is that Kenny just gets his accuracy more back in place and he starts hitting some more throws. Like, that's the thing I think that is the clearest path to happening, because we've seen it from him already. Like, inaccuracy was never really an issue with him prior to these first 2 games. So if he can start hitting some of these open throws with more regularity, like he had a couple in this game, the touchdown to Pickens, that was perfectly placed while getting hit. Granted, he was wide open, but it was still right in Brad Baskin, right where he run and score. But until we see one of those chains break, and I'm hoping it's going to be that, this is just going to continue to get worse and worse and worse.
Yeah, I mean, accuracy has not been an issue with Kenny Pickett in college. Like, that's not an area that he typically struggles. He's pretty, at least generally accurate. And I think that being skittish is the problem right now because
it's
of that offensive line play.
Yeah.
And I posted the grades of the Steelers offensive line this week. It was really bad. And so
yeah,
it's again, what everybody needs to understand. I feel like it's not a one size fits all. It's not just Pickett. It's not just the offensive line. It's not just Canada. It truly is a collection of all three. So we're going to get to these other two in just a second here. But Pickett has to play better. I mean, some of these are routine throws. I think he's rushing him a little bit because, I mean, Garrett was getting in there fast. Zadarius was getting in there fast. That pressure right in his face. And so he's trying to get the ball out and deliver the pass. Now, kudos to him for hanging in there tough.
Yes.
When he took a big shot, and that was on the 71-yard touchdown pass to George Pickens. Pickens did the work after the catch, but he did the tough work early on by hanging in there. And so those are the big time throws that you like to see Kenny Pickett make. The problem is he's missing on the routine stuff.
Yeah.
And when you go back and watch the All-22, Shayne, it's a little bit less encouraging even than what we see on the broadcast view, because you're seeing that Pickett is just he's not feeling where the defensive coverage is. Like the guy, he had the linebacker slide right underneath there of the safety. It was Delpit that did for the one pass for the interception. Never saw him, kind of just tunnel vision right there. It got locked up on Pickens. And kind of just went to his first read, did not see Delpit sliding underneath. And there was another play later in the game, Shayne, that nobody's really talking about right now. I think the same thing would have happened. He's looking at another slant route, and the ball gets batted down. I can't remember if it was Dalvin Tomlinson or whoever batted it
I think I remember that play, yeah.
The ball was batted down, but it certainly looked like that could have been another disastrous play right there, Shayne. And then you look at the third questionable decision of that game. Pickett's rolling to his right.
Now
it looks like he's trying to, it looks like he's going to throw the ball out of bounds. And then he does not. He tries to either squeeze it in, or if it was a throw out of bounds attempt, it was dreadfully failed because that ball hit a Browns defender right in the hand, should have been picked off. So the decision-making has been very poor. I think that Pickett's playing a little bit scared right now, and that is not what you want. Like I went into this season, Shayne, going on record and saying that I think Pickett's best trait is his confidence.
Yeah.
He was so confident looking throughout the summer, during the preseason. We saw this during his senior year in the ACC at Pitt. And so now if you get that confidence shaken, it's so hard to get it back as a quarterback. And so I hope that's not the case. I hope that he can have a really big confidence building game this week, again, in primetime football, this time against the Raiders, which we're going to talk about here in a minute. But Pickett has to be improved. And I think it has to start with his decision-making and just got to get that confidence back. I know that your line has not given you a reason to be confident, but got to get it back. With that said, Shayne, let's talk about the offensive line and where they can improve. What do they have to do moving forward? Because it's been a train wreck so far.
Well, the first thing they can do is get Dan Moore off the field. I hate to say this because he's a guy that we are hoping can continue to at least incrementally improve over the course of his career. And it's been 2 games and it's been 2 really tough matchups. I get it. But he has been beyond abysmal as a pass blocker.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, just atrocious. And it gets to a point where you just have to wonder, as much as I have questions about Broderick Jones' ability to pass protect at a high level as a rookie, one, he's undoubtedly a better run blocker already, like without a doubt. Better athleticism, better strength, everything. But if Moore's going to be this poor as a pass blocker, does it matter if Jones is also bad? Like at this, because he can't be worse realistically, at least from from what we've seen so far from Dan Moore. He cannot possibly be worse. So even if he takes his lumps, at least he's out there helping with the run game. At least he's getting experience. Like, I just don't see the benefit of leaving Moore out there at this point. Mm-hmm. Maybe you move him over at some point. Maybe if a core 4 continues not to really impress, he's at least been average at best this year so far. But maybe he gets another chance to play tackle or right tackle at some point. But I just don't see the benefit in sitting a guy unless he truly isn't ready to play, which I don't think he looked that bad. He looked good enough in the preseason where he knows what he's supposed to be doing. It just might not always work out. I have to see that move happen before I think this line is going to get significantly better.
Yeah, Shayne, I couldn't agree with you more. It has to happen. I mean, you trade up to the 14th overall pick to get a guy who you think can help you at left tackle. Yeah. And I know that they weren't planning. I know the plan was not to start him this early, but we've seen how things are going with Dan Moore. And I want to chime in with this real quick because there's a narrative going out there that Myles Garrett just make no difference at all. Dan Moore shut him down the last couple times they played. Please consider the context here.
Yes.
It's okay. If Myles Garrett does not have a sack on the stat sheet, does not mean that he did not make an impact in this game.
Yes.
He pulverized Dan Moore. And I went back and watched this game twice already. So let the eye test tell you what's actually going on. Don't let the box score determine how good a player is, because Myles Garrett is a good player, whether you guys want to admit it or not. I know it's hard for a lot of Steelers fans, and I love Watt. I'd still take Watt over Garrett. Yes. I think that the splash plays matter,
especially for our scheme.
And for the Steelers, I think that Watt is phenomenal, and the plays that he creates, they can't win a lot of these games without him. But Garrett is also an exceptional player in his own right, so don't act like he didn't make a difference in this game. He just bulldozed more. And it's part of the reason why Pickett was so uncomfortable, was because of Myles Garrett. And so, not to go on a Garrett rant here, but I do want to give him the credit that he's due for this game. He had an excellent game. So at the same time, Shayne, Dan Moore had a 3.5 pass block grade, 3.5.
Yeah.
In true pass sets, it was a perfect 0. So you can't get much worse than what we've seen from Dan Moore so far. Again, albeit against great competition. You would against Nick Bosa, you would against Myles Garrett. It's not going to get much harder than that. It's not going to get any harder than that on the Steelers schedule this year.
No.
However, I do think that it's time. I think that as early as we are entering week 3 right now, it is time to go to your vastly more talented first-round pick in Broderick Jones, who can handle this, who was the 5-star recruit, who doesn't have a ton of experience, but was in the best college football program in the nation, the championship program at Georgia. He's ready for this next step, I think, more so than what Dan Moore has shown in his 3rd season now. And so I do think that that's the first part of it. The second part, Shayne, when it comes to how can the offensive line improve, I was very discouraged when I went back and saw some of the things that I saw. And Brian Baldinger had a breakdown of some of the things that are going wrong for the Steelers offensive line. And I was scratching my head. Like, I got some serious questions for Pat Meyer right now, because the Steelers on the goal line trying to punch the ball in on that conversion attempt with Najee Harris, these guys are positional blocking. They are reach blocking. You are not hitting hat on a hat and trying to drive the guy forward in front of you in these run plays. You are positional blocking and trying to get your body in the way and turn and move defenders that way, instead of moving them forward in front of you. And so I have really some serious questions about why this is happening and in the situations that they're happening so far. I think that's part of the problem when we talk about Steelers run game specifically. So that could be a Pat Meyer problem. And if we have a Pat Meyer problem, well, then that stems deeper than what we can do personnel-wise on the offensive line. And so that's something to keep an eye on moving forward. Are the Steelers going to continue that route of let's try to turn and reach block people instead of just get a hat on a hat and drive people forward? Because I think that that's a mentality that a lot of other good teams have and good offensive lines have, is especially in running situations. I mean, your goal is to dominate the guy up in front of you. And it doesn't seem like Steelers have that same goal in mind. There's more of a technical standpoint. Let's turn and move people east and west instead of north and south. And so something to keep an eye on moving forward. Let's talk about Matt Canada here before we get into our game preview. Shayne, is he the biggest issue of them all? And we have a couple Matt Canada question in the chat as well, but is Canada the biggest issue of them all right now?
Yeah, so as far as the chat questions, you're about to hear a lot about Matt Canada, so you'll get your answers there. As far as the question, because for our topic, should the Steelers fire Matt Canada? Absolutely, should have already happened. However, the biggest problem with it right now is because of the fact that the offense is poorly coached and poorly called, the players that are already struggling are going to struggle that much more, right? And we talked about it whenever I was talking about Kenny Pickett and how he can improve. It all comes from the top, right? So Matt Canada is the start of the chain of issues. His play calling, his sequencing of plays, his inability to be creative, his inability to adjust to things, it all starts that issue and it all goes downhill from there, right? Now, if we fire him, I don't know who's going to call plays. I don't particularly care because it can't be worse than what it is. But at this point, when you talk about continuity, right? That was something that they talked about. The reason why he was brought back, I really think it's just because they don't fire people. We know that. We talk about that all the time. But it's great to have continuity if that continuity is positive, but he's not teaching these guys anything. He's not helping them learn the positions. He's not helping them learn the offense any better. Everything is just continuing to take a downhill slide. And for me, what it comes down to, and you talked about with the offensive line coaching, right? I don't know what Pat Meyer's necessarily trying to get these guys to do because it's just not something that's in my expertise. However, with the reach blocking, with the positional blocking, all that stuff, we have a running back, our main running back, as a guy who's 240 pounds. Yes, he has movement skills side to side. He has that stuff going for him, but that's really best used in the open field. They continue to run him on outside runs. They continue to run non-power runs with him. And people were wondering, well, why is Najee dancing? Why is it like, yeah, he has issues with that. But if the play call is, hey, we're running right down these guys' throats, I want you to just either create a hole that's not there by going straight north and south, or I want you to hit that hole as hard as you can when it opens up and punish people in the level. That is not what they're doing offensively. They're running shotgun runs. They're like all these things. I'm like, you do not have the personnel to do this. You don't have a wide zone running offense to begin with. So running outside runs with this guy and trying to reach block, it's just not going to work. Like your tackles don't have the ability to get out there and do that right now. Now, if Jones was out there, they'd have a better success on outside runs because he can get out there easier and he has more ability to do that. But again, you're trying to run runs with Najee that don't work because you're not running runs that he would be good with. And Jaylen Warren, when he has been in there so far, his efficiency has gone down in a small amount of carries because they're not opening holes at all. So it just doesn't, like, nothing is working with the run game specifically. And I think it's going to be the reason ultimately this offense takes even longer to get going because they have to be ahead of the chains for Matt Canada's offense to have a chance to work, right? It even doesn't guarantee it's going to, but at least gives you a shot. You cannot go to 3rd and 10 with his offense and be successful. It just doesn't work.
Yeah, and credit Najee there a little bit too, because those big runs that he was bottled up in the backfield. It was Najee doing the work of breaking the tackles. Now we know that he's not super fast when you get him out in space, but I mean, the Steelers could have barely had positive rushing yards this game if it wasn't for those two. They legitimately, they were right there. And by the way, I just said the Steelers are last in the league in rushing, and so it's not hard to see why. But I agree with you, Shayne. You're trying to run Najee out of shotgun outside of tackle. That is not where he's going to win. I mean, that's something that Anthony McFarland or Jaylen Warren could be doing
a better chance, at least
probably a little bit more effectively.
If you could block
exactly. And the blocking matters so much here too. So people always question, like, all right, if you want to get rid of Canada so bad, and there's a lot of people defending him still, and that's fine. But if you want to get rid of Canada so bad, what is he doing wrong? And what I would ask you to do is I would point to the passing concepts. They are so poor. They are so poor. And I've seen the actual plays on PFF Premium, the plays that Matt Canada has run in these first couple of weeks. There's no spacing. There's no picks and rubs. There's no getting guys on these shallow crossers that can get open, yards after the catch stuff. The Steelers, according to Sports Info Solutions, they ran one slant route the entire week 1 against the San Francisco 49ers. I didn't see what this was this past week. I have not had time to look at that yet.
This week, but yeah.
And then one of them is obviously the one that Pickett telegraphed him through the pick on, unfortunately, because I don't want them. Canada don't say this is, oh, we're just going to stick with our out routes and curls now. Don't do that, please.
No,
I mean, there's plays where it's a 4 verts and you only got one guy in route. That's a legitimate option. They did that at the goal line in week 1. There are plays with 3 curls and 1 out route. What's your max potential on that play? You're going to get 5 yards on the out and then maybe turn it upfield for a few more before you hit the sideline. It's like nothing has the potential to be explosive. Like, and I said this yesterday in the curtain calls, Shayne. I'm like, if I could give Canada one piece of advice, I'd say, please watch Mike McDaniel and some of what he does in Miami, because I think that his offense is the anti-Canada offense. It's all about utilizing your skill players. It's all about getting guys in space and allowing them to work after the catch. Now, obviously, undeniably, the Dolphins have better skill players than the Steelers. Nobody's going to argue that. But that doesn't mean that Steelers can't increase their offensive potential if the passing concepts weren't so bad. And so if you ask my opinion, yes, I'm ready for Canada to be done. I was ready for him to be done this past offseason. I think it was a mistake moving forward with him, even just because he had a year remaining on his contract. And so I would love to have a discussion with anybody who wants to argue that. I've seen enough of the All-22. I've seen enough of his passing concepts over the past 2 years in the first 2 games of this season to say that I think he is just bad. I genuinely think he is just bad. And I've got one more stat to show. Well, I wish I could put this graphic up, Shayne. We're doing this live right now, but the Steelers passing and rushing EPA so far this season, it's 2-game sample. So take that for what it is. Their passing and rushing EPA so far this season is in a quadrant of its own.
Yeah,
it is so
they are separately from the rest of the league. How about that?
They are so far down below. If you want, this graphic is floating out on Twitter. I put it on my Twitter account. If you want to take a look at that at some point, they are so far down in the bottom left corner in terms of EPA by themselves that the Panthers, the Carolina Panthers, Shayne, they are closer to being the best offense in the league in terms of EPA than they are to the Steelers. The Panthers are closer to being the best offense in the NFL than they are to the Pittsburgh Steelers right now. You cannot tell me, you cannot convince me that this is just a talent issue.
Yeah.
Because I've seen the players. Adam Thielen is your best receiver. I know the Panthers offense isn't that much more talented than the Steelers. This stems from coaching. When you're when your rushing EPA and your passing EPA are in a quadrant of their own, this stems from the coaching, and something has to be done about this. This cannot continue. It's shameful. It really is shameful, Shayne. All right, enough about that. We've talked about some of the things the Steelers need to do here. I think my take is fire Matt Canada. I don't know what the solution is. You're going to ask me, okay, then who do you get? I don't care.
It doesn't matter at this point. Like, that's the thing. It doesn't matter.
I generally don't care. I don't think you can go any lower. Like, I think you've literally hit rock bottom. Maybe Canada will improve for the remainder of the season. But in terms of an actual coordinator that you can bring in, it's not going to get a whole lot worse than what we've seen. All right, enough about this rant. If you are a fan of the Pittsburgh Steelers and you would like to support the Steel Curtain Podcast, please consider subscribing to the Steel Curtain Podcast on YouTube. We appreciate all of your support. And if you are joining us here in the live chat, please drop your questions for us. We'll see what we can get time to. We got to sign off here around 2:30 today. Let's talk about Steelers versus Raiders. Let's preview this game, Shayne. Biggest things to watch for in week 3. I think this one's a little bit more attainable maybe than last. I feel more comfortable about playing the Raiders, although this team has not been very successful going out to the West Coast and playing the Raiders on their own turf. That's something to keep in mind here. In terms of odds, let's start with the odds here. The Steelers are 2.5 point underdogs. That kind of sucks because the Raiders aren't that good of a football team, really. And you look at offenses. I mean, Raiders offense has been right near bottom of the barrel right here so far in these first 2 games as well. But that's kind of Vegas kind of has them as a pick 'em. So if this was on a level playing field, if you don't know how this works, the odds, you always are given 3 points for home field advantage. So this is essentially a pick 'em game, and they're giving those 3 points to the Raiders. So maybe the Steelers would be slight favorites if this was played at Acra. Sure. A couple point favorites there. So 2.5 point underdogs. Is that a fair line to start this game off with, Jim?
I think it almost at this point has to be considered fair because they're assuming that the Steelers aren't going to score 14 points on defense again, right? Because if you let's assume that we score a roughly 10 points, right? Because that's what we've been scoring. Raiders can probably score 13, right? Even if they're bad.
That's what they're averaging is 13.5.
Exactly. So they're probably you know what, that seems fair. And I hate to say that, but they're right. Until we prove that we can score even 20 points offensively without the help of the defense, how can you favor this team with any kind of certainty? Because it's so much. There's going to be so much variance involved. If the defense scores a touchdown, you probably win. That's just usually how that happens, how that works. Or if we have a punt return or something for a touchdown. But outside of that, I mean, they have to prove to the rest of the league and to Vegas, in the case of the odds, that they can score points first.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to blame odds makers for this, obviously, and I think that they're going with the safe line here, and you're going to get a lot of people betting on the Steelers probably at that plus 2.5.
Yeah, which is
they're
fair.
plus 114 odds is what they have right now. So, and I understand that you're trying to make a few bucks there, but Steelers offense is not giving you a lot of reason to be confident. That's for sure. So far, over under for that game is set at 43.5 points right now, which is probably a little bit high considering the lack of offense both of these teams have had through 2 weeks so far. So Shayne and I will get to our predictions here in just a few minutes. Let's move on to the matchups to watch in this, Shayne. What these really we always like to highlight the biggest matchups and things to keep an eye on the most. And so I want to start off right away with by far the best defensive player on the Raiders, one of the best in the league, I think, in terms of overall impact. Obviously, the edge rusher position is so important. It might be the most important position on the defensive side of the football. It can just impact the game any given play, and the best ones can do it at a high level. Max Crosby is right up there. I mean, he's right up there. He might not be on par with a Parsons or a healthy TJ Watt or Garrett, but I mean, he's just a step below those guys. This guy is a disruptor in every sense of the word. And so having him go against Chuks Okorafor, who is coming off of a 37 graded game against the Cleveland Browns, going up against primarily Zadarius Smith on that right side there, did not look very good. Not that anybody did on the offensive line, Shayne, but this is a tall task. And I'm going to tell you right now, if they don't treat Max Crosby the way that Cleveland just treated Watt, and you are chipping him all the time to give help on your right tackle, then there's an issue here that stems as high as Mike Tomlin to say, yes, this is what you need to be doing. Neutralize the biggest threat on this team, which is Max Crosby.
Yeah, they have to, right? Because Okorafor has not been, he's been better than Moore, but being better than Moore is being anybody because he's
that's not a high bar to clear.
He's
right
quite
now.
Literally the worst tackle in the league through 2 weeks, but they do need to treat him very similarly to how a lot of teams treat Watt, and really just the other top edge rushers, right? It's like you cannot allow your tackle to have one-on-ones with him very often because right now the Raiders' interior defensive line and the rest of their defensive front in general just isn't doing a whole lot of anything outside of Crosby.
Yeah.
So you can afford to let Dan Moore try to survive against, how whoever they end up putting out there, whether it's the first round pick for them this year or whoever it is, he can handle that matchup better than Okorafor is going to handle Crosby, right? Or if they flip flop.
And if Moore can't handle that, Shayne, it's time for
I mean, I just think Jones should play anyway, but that's beside the point. I'm working with what I know we're going to see. But Crosby's going to be a factor in this game, whether we want him to be or not. No matter what we do, he's going to be. But if we can at least mitigate that issue and try to give the offensive line some confidence to say, hey, you guys went out there and beat those guys up. Yeah, they're bad, but it doesn't matter, right? Like you beat them up. Like you have to get something going. And if it doesn't happen this week, especially on the interior, right? Like the tackles are just not good. So like it might not matter that much. But if the interior players who I really trusted a lot more, if they can't get it going against this Raiders defensive line, then we're really going to have to start to wonder if there's any hope for them to really get it going this year. So you hope that Okorafor can hold up well enough with some help.
Yeah, I mean, I agree that this is a big matchup for the Steelers because Crosby has some of that game-wrecking ability.
He does.
Where he gets a few sacks. Those are drive killers. And so account for this guy. Please account for this guy. If you account for one person on defense, this is the guy that you need to be studying all week long. Let's talk about the next matchup, the highlight here. Steelers cornerbacks against Davante Adams. Adams is good still. I know he's getting up there in age. He's not the most athletic receiver at this point, but my goodness, he is one of the most consistent receivers in the league and already looks, again, like he's going to have another really strong season for the Raiders. The Steelers have to account for this guy on offense. That is the one guy that you need to know where he is at all times on the for their defense. And it is a little bit scary, Shayne, considering just how beat up Patrick Peterson and Levi Wallace have gotten each of these first 2 weeks against Amari Cooper, against Brandon Ayuk, just had an essentially perfect game against the Steelers in week 1. And so that cannot happen. If Brandon Ayuk can do it, so can Davante Adams. And so he's well capable of having one of those 8-catch, 140-yard type of performances and a touchdown against the Steelers. They can't allow that to happen because that means he's cooking. The offense is firing up more so than it has instead of being right now. The Raiders are tied for last in the league in points per game. Let's keep it that way, please, because we want to show that the Steelers defense has something in it to kind of pitch one of those shutout type games against a team that shouldn't score that many points against them. But if somebody's going to, it's going to be Davante Adams.
See, this is the problem is like, this is like the worst possible matchup for this team other than like Tyreek Hill or somebody with elite speed.
Yeah.
Because no one's staying with him. Like, if we're being honest, like
such a good route runner too.
Yeah. The route running and the fact that all of our corners that are playing consistently are guys who have lost a step laterally and down the field. Like, it's a nightmare. Like I have to just assume that he's going to go off for like 130 yards. We just have to hope it doesn't matter. Right. Like that's ultimately what it means. Like if he's going to get his, it means that the next guy we're going to talk about in the matchup with him can't get his also. The rest of the receivers have to be able to be, kept in check. And Garoppolo has to turn the ball over a couple of times, whether that's us getting to him on strip sacks like we've been doing, or if it's picking off a pass, because he's going to throw you a couple probably. It's just kind of how he is. You have to make plays elsewhere because I just don't trust them to really do much against Adams.
Yeah, I think so too. And I think Jacoby Myers will probably be back from that concussion this week. If I had to guess, had a pair of touchdowns in week 1. And so, I mean, still, regardless, Adams is the guy you have to focus on. You got to make sure that he doesn't pick you apart because Garoppolo, that's going to be his first read in a lot of these plays. And I don't want him to get into rhythm early there either. Another matchup I have highlighted here, Shayne, Steelers linebackers against Josh Jacobs. Jacobs has not done much from a rushing standpoint so far this season. Obviously, it was terrific last year and had just had an amazing breakout year, which is kind of odd at the stage of his career that he was already in. But Jacobs can do a lot of damage as a receiver too. And one thing that the Steelers linebackers have not been known for over these past several years is their coverage ability. So if you get this guy sneaking out of the backfield, you cannot just let him just tear you apart on these Texas routes and on a wheel route coming out of the backfield. You need to show that they can have tight coverage. You can stick with them. I've been more impressed with the linebacker play this past week than I have of really all the linebacker play last year. Like, that's how bad it was.
Yeah.
But they got to show that they can do this consistently, come downhill, make those plays on Josh Jacobs, and especially kind of shut him out of that receiving game as well. Don't let him be that check down option.
Yeah, so my biggest concern is Josh Jacobs, like you said, has been really dreadful as a runner through 2 games, 28 carries, 46 yards, under 2 yards per carry. It kind of feels like he's due. And unfortunately, going against the Steelers right now is probably a good way to get going against the run, or as far as in your run game. And I do hope that he's not going to have a true, 180-yard, crazy breakout type performance. But this is a guy that did it last year a lot, and he certainly could do it this year still. And you talked about the receiving ability, and he certainly has it. My thing is, if you get him in space, can they tackle him? Because so far they have not given me any reason to think they can tackle guys in space. I mean, there's a lot of ugly reps just in this last game not just by the linebackers, but just by the team in general. And Jacobs is one of those guys, if you don't tackle him, he's already hard enough to tackle as it is. If you can't get him down in space, it's going to get ugly really fast.
Yeah, I mean, for how many tackles they missed on a quarterback last week in Deshaun Watson, you can bet that for a Pro Bowl level running back that they have the chance to be equally as bad there. The tackling has to improve all around.
Yes,
that's not just on the linebackers, it's everybody. Issue, But the tackling was horrendous this past game. The Steelers got to clean that up. Next one I have highlighted here, Shayne, Alex Highsmith against Colton Miller, one of the better left tackles in the league, just a pure fluid pass protector, very athletic tackle, has been good for years now. And so Highsmith he's had some difficult matchups early on. You get Trent Williams. I mean, that's the hardest. It doesn't get any worse than that. So week 1, probably the best left tackle in the league for my money. Get a little bit of a break against Jedrick Wills, had some nice plays, obviously the strip sack. And then the other play came in coverage, and so it didn't really have anything to do with the tackle matchup there. But this week, you're going back to another hard matchup against Colton Miller, who is one of the best pass protectors in the league. And so I'd like to be able to see him feast a little bit over there, because I have a feeling that the Raiders are going to take some notes from the Browns game plan, kind of try to neutralize Watt a little bit. Now, Watt still got his record-breaking sacks, and we didn't talk about that at all, but congrats to Watt.
Yes,
we knew that was coming real early at some point this season.
No surprise there. Yeah.
No surprise at all, and it's going to be a record that is not easily broken. I will say that. Watt gets to that 28 years old, going to turn 29 next month, and that's probably a record he's going to hold onto for a long time there. But back to Highsmith, I think he's going to have to win that one-on-one with Colton Miller, because it's going to be much of the same for Watt. I have a feeling you're going to chip him with a running back or tight end routinely to get him a little off balance there, make the right tackle's job a little bit easier. And so if Highsmith can get a couple quick wins, another strip sack in this game, like one of those game-changing type plays, like we saw a pair of those from him this past week, we cannot expect that. But if he can do that, that'll be big for the Steelers. And we'll see how that matchup goes. And then one more matchup that I have highlighted here, Shayne, for today is I've got Kenny Pickett against himself, because I really think that's the biggest monster he needs to defeat right now is his own timidness, his skittishness in the pocket. He needs to get that confidence back like we've never seen it before. The confidence that he was soaring in the preseason when everything was just so easy against second, third stringers. He's had such a hard task against some really, really good front sevens these first 2 games, like I've already pointed out. But if he can get that confidence back in himself, say, yeah, I don't need to rush. I'm good. Deliver an accurate pass, stand tough in the pocket. Don't get skittish in there. And then, yes, use your legs. By all means, don't use it because you're just bailing on the pocket. You're worried about getting hit. Use it because that's what you do, Kenny Pickett. You can extend the plays. You can make things happen with your legs. You can throw accurately on the run. So if Pickett can get out of his own head, Shayne, I think that he has the potential. I'm not giving up on him yet. I think that he has potential for this bounce back performance here, the one that fans are dying to see, one that we need to see. The Steelers have to score. They have to score 20 plus points in this game. You can't stay on this trend of dismal offensive performances. And Shayne, I would love nothing more if it meant that the defense has a lousy game this week, I would love nothing more than to see Pickett go off for 300 yards and 2 or 3 touchdowns. Like, that is the type of game we have not seen from Pickett yet. That is the type of game that we need to see from him.
Yeah, I'll just say this with Kenny. I wish with all my heart that Matt Canada would get some moving pockets going, man. Like, get him on the move on purpose. Get it to where the line cannot collapse around him because there's no way for it to happen. And just start throwing some stuff down the field in those situations and to the sideline on longer plays. Like, give him something that he can just, I want to see half the field. Let's get the offense moving. And I don't want him to become a half-field read quarterback or anything like that. And he isn't. But make it easier. And this is the main thing that's really killing me, is that everything is so hard. He makes the offense as difficult it feels like as possible because he removes the ability for it to be based on chunk plays. Getting a chunk play is so important in the NFL. You look at the statistics on that. Explosive plays mean so much for scoring points because it just makes it easier. Now I don't have to get 7 first downs on this drive to score a touchdown. Now I need 3. It's just,
and it only makes sense, Shayne. The more explosive plays you have, the more chance that one of those explosive plays leads to a touchdown or is a touchdown in itself. So yeah, I agree with you. We said this again yesterday on the other show. Don't live to get into third and manageable situations.
Right. We
try to get a first down on every play. I mean, obviously it's not going to happen every single run play, but essentially that should be what you're trying to accomplish. Try to get a first down all the time. And let's see this connection with Pickens again, like down the sideline. Pickens obviously had a great game, the 71-yarder after the catch. So that really helped kind of secure that win for the Steelers there, as well as the defensive plays. But don't stop doing the sideline stuff either. I know I said we don't want it to come down to a third and a YOLO ball to Pickens, but at the same time, use your players to their strengths. Pickens is remarkable in one-on-one situations. If you can find him down the field, Kenny, let him do some of the dirty work for you as well. So I really think it is a lot of Pickett against himself this week, just getting out of his own head, kind of getting back into a rhythm here. Be that player that people want you to be, that you have confidence in yourself that you can be. Make that second year jump. Show us that you are the quarterback of this football team. And so I think that it starts this week. It starts against a much more manageable defense that you're going up against. Show that you can be that guy. All right, Shayne, we've only got a few more minutes left before we'll have to sign off here for today. Let's quickly give our keys to success for Steelers. So Shayne, go ahead and give me one offensive and one defensive key to success for Pittsburgh.
So offensively, you have to run the ball for 100 yards or more, because until you can get the run game going, Matt Canada's offense doesn't work. We've seen that last year at the end of the season when it was working a little bit better, when the points were coming up a slight bit. It was because they're running the football real good. That just makes it much easier to deal with his manage, get the third down style play, because if you can stay ahead of the chains, you're going to have a chance that if you execute, you can at least get the ball down the field, get some field goals, get some touchdowns. That's really the number one thing. And then defensively, you have to attack Jimmy Garoppolo and make him have to get the football out either quickly, so that you have an opportunity to keep Devontae Adams from getting his deep shots down the field that he's so good at tracking and everything else. And it also just has more opportunities for big plays to happen defensively, whether it's strip sacks, whether it's force the ball into coverage because he has to get the ball out, whatever it is. Make them make mistakes, because McDaniels ultimately, he wants to just run this kind of rhythmic, quick passing game. He wants to do all that stuff. If you can take him out of that and keep him from being able to just pinpoint passes, and that's what Garoppolo has been good at in the past, you're going to do just fine defensively.
Yeah, my offensive key, Shayne, is I want to see a U-shaped pocket all night long on Sunday Night Football, because I understand. I give you a little bit of leeway these first two games. Now, the offensive line play is still inexcusable, but you win against some really, really talented players and units overall. Now going against essentially what is just equates to Max Crosby, contain him, get that pocket going, allow Pickett to get comfortable. If they are not good in pass protection this game, we've got some serious problems. And I think Broderick will have to come in immediately. And I hate to say, I hate to think that there's a talent issue so far beyond that. Like, I'm not convinced that Mason Cole's a guy. I'm not convinced that Okorafor is a long-term option at right tackle. I think those guys are players that you eventually need to replace. But I'd like to be able to get through this season and have a lot of confidence in this offensive line that it is trending in the right direction. And that's going to help Pickett in his success, obviously, as well. He just had no time to work with last week. Got to get him in a pocket. Defensively, Shayne, I think the key is going to be to get Garoppolo a little bit flustered early on offense, bring a couple blitzes, Highsmith, Watt getting after the quarterback, because we know that Garoppolo is not known for his athletic traits. He's not a guy that's going to kill you escaping outside the pocket. He wants to stay in the pocket and deliver the ball comfortably in rhythm, in timing. And so get him flustered early, to have somebody come right up the middle and smash him once or twice. And so if they can get him out of rhythm, the Steelers should be able to control all the momentum on the defensive side of the ball there. All right, Shane and I are going to close with our predictions for the Steelers versus Raiders in week 3, because it's kind of like this vintage matchup that we saw last week on the Christmas Eve game, and it came down to that frigid game. Kenny Two Gloves Pickett making that game-winning drive. Not a lot of offense prior to that. Do you think that this game is going to go in a similar fashion as we saw last time? Is it going to be a defensive struggle? Is it going to be a slop fest like we just saw against the Browns? What are your predictions with a score for us, Shane?
So I have 21-17 Steelers. I think that they do probably get a touchdown from another avenue than offense again for that to happen, but I'm going to pick them to win, some way, somehow with that 21-17 score. I just think they're a better overall team than the Raiders still. And at some point the offense has to get going. And if there's ever a time for it, it would be against this Raiders defense, who just got freshly carved up by Josh Allen. He didn't even do any of his crazy stuff. He just moved the ball down the field consistently. And guess what? That's what Canada wants to do. So, hey, maybe they can do it against a team like this.
Okay. Going with the 21-17. I've got the Steelers 19-17. I'm smashing the under this week. I'm smashing the under for teams that average 9.5 points and 13.5 points respectively in this game. I know this is on the road. I don't think I think it's going to be one of those low scoring affairs. Now, obviously, I'm hopeful, Shane. I'm hopeful that the Steelers can come out and score 24, 27 points. Until they prove that to me, until they prove that with this unit in this year, I'm just not going to buy it. I'm going to go under with the point total, but I am betting on the Steelers. For those that are betting, the Steelers have plus 114 odds on DraftKings. You get them right now. I do feel somewhat confident in that, but it's not anything that I'm going to be putting a 50 spot on or anything in this game. I think it could genuinely go either way. I've got 19-17 Steelers. Those are our predictions. Make sure you leave yours in the comment section for us, and we'd love to be able to reply back to you. For those of you who are here in the live chat, or for any listeners at home, we are here every single Wednesday live at 1:30 p.m. Eastern time. Please join us. Shane and I love doing this. We love getting your thoughts, your interactions with us as well. Please subscribe to the Steel Curtain podcast, and so we can continue to bring you coverage. We plan on bringing you 2 shows per week for the time being. All right. Thank you all for joining us today on the show. You can follow Shane on Twitter at Shayne Kubas. You can follow me on Twitter at Tommy Jaggi. You can download the Steel Curtain podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Also, check us out on YouTube or ask Alexa to play the Steel Curtain podcast. And thanks for joining us on the Steel Curtain podcast.